Thanks, everyone. So pleased to have you all here. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Booten. I'm the Executive Director of Stella. It is a real delight to see so many people here in person with us, and welcome also to those of you who are joining us on the live stream. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're on. That's the Wiradjuri Woiwurrung people here in the Kulin Nations. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, as well as the First Nations people, artists, activists, writers who are with us in this room. At Stella, we are very conscious that issues of sovereignty and culture and justice is very tightly connected in the work of First Nations writers, and we see ourselves as having a part to play where appropriate in that work, and we do so in a spirit of collaboration and learning, and we look forward to more of that in the future. It's an absolute delight to be here to announce the 2022 Stella Prize Longlist. It is, as I said, the first time in 2 years that we've all been together. We are very keen as an organisation to celebrate the 10th year of Stella this year. It is, there are Stella founders in the room tonight who were part of that original cohort of people who saw a problem in our industry and decided to roll up their sleeves and do something about it. It is it's an honour really to be continuing that work now. Before we get into the actual list, I just want to do some thank yous. Stella is a collective endeavour, and the things we do are only possible because of those who support us. So firstly, I want to thank our patrons. That's Ellen Koshland of the Koshland Innovation Fund and Paula McLean of the McLean Foundation. Ellen as our founding patron. Yeah, a bit of love. Thank you. Ellen Koshland, as our founding patron, really was integral in the start of Stella and continues to be one of our most vocal and celebratory supporters, and we are delighted to have her in the family. Alongside her, Paula McLean of the McLean Foundation is an extraordinary supporter to Stella. She is a past board member and an extraordinary philanthropist who some of you know made an incredible contribution to Stella late last year with a $1 million donation. Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. That donation really is to help us build the Stella Forever Fund. The purpose of that fund is to endow the Stella Prize forever. We think women and non-binary writers' stories deserve to be told now and into the future, and Paula has challenged us to plan for that kind of longevity. I'd also like to thank the Copyright Agency. There are 12 long-listed authors who will be receiving prize money into their bank accounts at any moment now. That comes thanks to the support of the Copyright Agency, who, as well as supporting Stella, are really valuable in the literary industry in Australia generally, and we thank them for their support. When we announce the winner of the Stella Prize, the 2022 Stella Prize in April, that author will receive $50,000 in prize money. We know that that can be life-changing. We hear that from the authors who have won it in the past. That money is made possible thanks to the Wilson Foundation and the commitment of Karen Wilson particularly. Stella is very honoured that they are our Stella Prize Award partners this year, as they've been for the last 2 years. I also want to thank a number of people who are integral to keeping Stella running. Carol Schwartz at the Trawala Foundation, our ambassador, Catherine Andrews, our board led by the steady hand of Karen Murray, and I would also say thank you to the team. Stella is a tiny but mighty organisation, and I am very lucky to work with some of the smartest and most dedicated people I've ever met. Alongside that, we know that there are, and I can see you in the room, publishers, booksellers, writers. There are past Stella shortlistees and winners. There are educators, researchers, academic partners. Everything we do at Stella is done because we work in partnership with people, and I want to thank you all for being part of it. I'm going to hand over to Melissa now. It is time to announce the 2022 Stella Prize longlist. As chair of our judges, Melissa has led the panel through an extraordinary process. It has been the small bits of watching like a fly on a wall, these people discuss and advocate for and bring an incredible rigour to the process of judging. I thank you all for it, and I can't wait to hear you talk about those books for everyone tonight. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Chair of the 2022 Stella Prize judges, Melissa Lucashenko.
Jinguwala Bundjalung. I've come down from Queensland from some pretty extreme floods, so if I'm a little bit off tonight, you'll have to excuse me. I'm Melissa Lucashenko, as you know. I'm a proud Bundjalung woman from Magunchen, Brisbane, and I'm here in my capacity as chair of the 2022 Stella Prize judge panel. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm Dinang Leila on the Jagun of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I'd also like to acknowledge all the other blackfellas and elders of the lands that this broadcast reaches. I thank the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people for their hospitality and their care of country. Bogle Bear, thank you. So the 12 books that are longlisted for the 2022 Stella Prize. Before I announce them, I'd just like to thank my fellow judges. Together we judged well over 200 entries, and collectively we chose 12 of the most original, excellent and engaging works by women and non-binary writers published across 2021. It was no easy task. Australian writers are producing innovative and sophisticated literature in very difficult times. It's been a great privilege to read and assess their work for the 2022 Stella. Ironically, in a year when the pandemic has meant international and some domestic borders have been closed to most Australians, the Stella field has ranged further than ever. A distinct outward-looking flavour characterised the pool of entries. Many authors focused on global affairs rather than on the Antipodean alone. Much of the short fiction and poetry we read was set offshore, and at least 2 of the long-listed authors are Australian expatriates. So much for Fortress Australia. And I don't know if it's a happy coincidence or an unhappy coincidence, we've also managed to longlist a book that's about a serious life-threatening flood. But the most obvious difference in Stella this year, though, has been the inclusion for the first time of poetry as an eligible genre. 4 of the most outstanding poetry collections entered are on our long list. Many powerful and appealing Australian writers' voices inevitably fell by the wayside in what's been an exceptionally strong year across genres. It's now my pleasure to announce the 2022 Stella Prize longlist. Please hold your applause until the end. In alphabetical order, Coming of Age in the War on Terror by Randa Abdel Fattah, published by New South Books. Take Care by Eunice Andrade, published by Giramondo. Drop Bear by Evelyn Araluen, published by the University of Queensland Press. She is Haunted by Paige Clark, published by Allen and Unwin. No Document by Anwin Crawford, published by Giramondo. Bodies of Light by Jennifer Down, published by Text. Billa Yarradungalungdere by Anita Heiss, published by Simon & Schuster. Stoned Fruit by Lee Lai, published by Fantagraphics. Permafrost by S.J. Norman, published by the University of Queensland Press. Homecoming by Elfie Shiosaki, published by Margabala Books. The Open by Lucy Vann, published by Cordite Books. And lastly, Another Day in the Colony by Chelsea Wadigo, published by the University of Queensland Press. Please join me in congratulating the longlistees. I'll get my fellow judges up now. Oh, I was supposed to sit over there, wasn't I? Whoops. So joining us by Zoom from Perth is our fellow judge, Sisonke Msimang. Hi, Sisonke.
Hi, everybody.
Hey. On my left, Declan Fry, Cate Kennedy and Oliver Reeson, who have all done the hard work along with myself and Sisonke. So, what a long list. Can we just maybe say a couple of words about impressions of the long list as a whole before we get into the poetry to start with? Mm-hmm. Oliver or Cate?
Love it.
That's good.
I think we knocked it out of the park with this one. I feel really excited about how diverse it is in themes, but also I feel really excited about how much poetry is on there for the first year that poetry has been submitted for the Stella Prize.
Yeah, Cate, you were saying you were a bit surprised but also pleased at how much poetry's ended up on the long list.
I really was. Talk about out of the gates, you know. It was incredible to read so much powerful, and of course we sort of had, you know, when you're crossing forms, you can imagine it's very difficult to be trying to assess, isn't it? Because even looking at fiction and non-fiction together, people say it's apples and oranges, but if you're looking at fiction, non-fiction and poetry...
Yeah, it's oranges and spaceships.
Apples and hubcaps, because they're all round, so therefore there's, you know... So it's kind of it was wonderful to kind of have that idea of what is original, what is excellent, what is engaging. So how is it landing on you? Like, how is it affecting you? And how well is that work fulfilling its... You know,
and engaging can mean so many different things too. I mean, Li Lai, the beautiful graphic novel, was just absolutely absorbing to read. And then you read the Sisonke or the Araluan or many of the others, and it's just like it hits you in the guts, and it's engaging in a totally different way again. So, yeah, it's that diversity of form and voice also means a diversity in impact, I guess. What about you, Declan? Anything to say about the overall long list?
I like that phrase out of the gate, and I think it's good to have had so many firsts in this long list. I'm very excited by the amount of poetry. Having a second, I think it is graphic novel. And yeah, I think formally, stylistically, it's a broad range. And it was really exciting, really, to have all of those genres. And I like to think, actually, that when we write, the medium is a vessel, and it's the message that matters. So in that sense, you know, poetry, non-fiction, prose, and the fact that some of these works, such as No Document, could be read as prose, could be read as poetry, could be read as prose poetry, I think tells us something about the fact that the medium matters, it defines the work, but it's not everything, and it was a joy just to judge the books for their as books and regardless of genre.
Sisonke, did you have any thoughts about the shape of the long list? I think when we'd come up with it, you said something about it's a revolutionary set of books that we've put together at the end of a grueling process.
Felt good. I love the shape. And I guess I just found myself often, as someone who's in the middle of trying to write myself, just like really resentful and angry that there's such talent and I was like, how do you top this? But no, it was, I think that, as everyone has said, the diversity of voices, what people are thinking about, and the way people are saying it. So incredibly beautiful words, but assembled in really interesting ways, and across a breadth of stuff. It was a very, very powerful experience of reading. And it's hard to stay engaged reading across so many books. And I will say that even amongst those books that weren't longlisted, the task felt like a joy very often.
It's always heartbreaking when you see books fall by the wayside, because the strength is absolutely really up there. And this was definitely one of those years where many books that could have made the shortlist we could only pick 12 books. We could have picked 48 of similar quality. So moving on to the specifics, I think poetry is the flavour of the year. So firstly, to Drop Bear, I'll say a few words about Drop Bear once I find my notes, by Evelyn Araluen, who I think is with us in the audience tonight. Yeah?
Yay!
Okay. This is from the judge's notes, a University of Queensland Press title, of course. Drop Bear is a breathtaking collection of poetry and short prose, which arrests key icons of mainstream Australian culture and turns them inside out with malice aforethought. Araluen's brilliance sizzles when she goes on the attack against the kitsch and the cuddly, against Australia's fantasy of its own racial and environmental innocence. She revels in difficult questions like, can't be lyric if you're flora, right? Can't be sovereign if you're fauna, right? And humans, did you really think all the bad Bankshire men were deady bones when they went to the bottom of the sea? Acerbic, witty, and with no reverence at all for the colony, Araluen remembers those dispossessed and voiceless, just as she predicts a hard-won future for her children. Look at this earth we cauterised, the healing we took with flame. I will show them a place they will never have to leave. I think... I would think, because I'm Bundjalung and so is Evelyn, but I think Evelyn's a genius. Sorry, Ollie. And yeah, I just want to say again that, Bundjalung country is people are dying. They have died today, had died yesterday, and may very well die overnight from the flooding. So the elements in this book that speak to climate catastrophe really couldn't be more timely. Did you want to say anything more about either Evelyn's or the other poetry books?
Let's do that. Take care, Declan. Oh.
So I suppose by way of announcement, I can mention another poetry collection that was published and longlisted, Eunice Undrada's Take Care, published by Giramondo. I think, it's not particularly memorable, but for me, one thing that I really liked was the fact that the language of this book kept echoing throughout the days after I'd read it. And in small ways, for example, the inclusion of Tagalog language alongside English. I kept thinking when I went outside, I wear slippers indoors and outdoors, and in Tagalog it's chinelas. So I was wearing my outdoor chinelas and my indoor chinelas, something Eunice Undrada reflects on. And I think it's telling that she does that, because this is also a very acerbic, witty, impassioned collection that deals with the violence of states and migration and the sort of underclasses that we have working in Australia and overseas by way of both a combination of wit and tenderness.
It's a very powerful, sustained metaphor, this idea of take care, isn't it? With the Filipino diaspora taking care of people all around the world, but simultaneously having to be very careful of themselves.
Yeah, that's right. And I appreciate the way that it does have that circling back on itself and a lot of circumspection. And in fact, maybe there was one poem Or no?
Yeah, go.
Read a bit.
It's a poem that we all loved, and it did come up during discussions as a favourite. It's called Don't You Hate It When Women. Don't you hate it when women kill the herbs on the windowsill, devote their year's salary to take out, put in the work and it isn't called women's work, depend on rechargeable limbs to stretch an eon, invent new vocabularies, aren't interrupted, coast on the high seas of their depression, are in each other's gaze, no longer products of myth, sleep safe on the late train, sleep the slumber of the wicked as empires succumb, take selfies from a million angles, each one the perfect angle, revolt, kill the cop, the colonizer, the capitalist living rent-free in their heads, demolish the altar built on their backs, without blame, walk away. She's just a queen of last lines, can I say? Really good.
She really is. Yeah. So, Kate.
No, Sisonke, maybe to talk about homecoming.
Yeah.
If that's okay.
Hey everybody. I guess important to acknowledge first that I am on Noongar Buja, and in fact, talking about homecoming. Elfie Shiosaki is a Noongar woman, and homecoming is this incredible tribute to 4 generations of Elfie's family, 4 generations of Noongar women, but also to the voices of many Noongar people going back into the archive. So it's this beautiful, poetic, heartbreaking, joy-bringing, powerful account of survival. It is told entirely, of course, in Black people's words, and specifically in the words of Indigenous women, Noongar women, to be even more specific. And in the place where A.O. Neville was such an incredible force for such a long time, such a destructive and brutal force for such a long time, the ability to think about the way that he shaped the historical archive in this state, and then to not speak back to him, but speak in spite of him, I think is quite a remarkable thing. And so I loved this collection of poetry for so many reasons. One, because poetry feels like it's not even an apt enough description. It's prose, it's poetry, it's a series of found poems. She's doing what a number of other Black women are doing globally, which is thinking about the archive in really interesting ways. We know what archives exist for. They're to categorize, to make lists of, to quantify human experience. And so they matter to societies that are interested in doing that. And of course, to societies that aren't interested in doing that, the archive becomes this other thing, which is a kind of place for memory and to find ourselves and to remember ourselves and to testify about what we have survived and been through. And so that is what homecoming does so beautifully. I could go on and on and on about what Elfie Shiosaki has done with this book, both in her own very light hand, but also, of course, in a really choral kind of way, speaking with many different voices across time, which is very beautiful.
Struck me, Sisonke, that in a way it's a little bit reminiscent of Tracker in that it has this this kaleidoscopic set of voices coming out of an Aboriginal community, speaking to one particular experience, that of child removal. So yeah, there's
Absolutely.
a parallel there with a previous Stella winner, in fact. Did you want to read anything from Shiosaki?
Sure. There's this very short, beautiful little piece that says so much. It's called Not Equal. Not equal, she said. Her eyes left mine, retreating into herself. Not treated equally, she said, correcting herself, teaching me, always.
It's a very deft, very light touch throughout the whole manuscript. It really is a stunning collection. Thanks, Sisonke.
Great to see Margabala too. I'm not sure if this might be the first.
No idea.
Listing?
No
Maybe,
idea, but
maybe.
but it is good to see small presses getting up there and punching well above their weight, for sure.
Yeah, talk about a press that punches above its weight.
Yeah.
So I'm going to talk about The Open by Lucy Van, which is a collection that I think lingers on the idea of personal identity under colonialism and capitalism, and sort of the borders, I guess, that demarcate personal identity, and how sort of complex and fraught they can be in between privacy and ownership. Something that recurs throughout this collection is this motif of doors, and it really, I think, speaks to what's so powerful about Van's imagery, is that a door as like a poetic metaphor can be so simple and cliche even, but she like always takes an image as far as it can go, but without being too heavy-handed about it. There's always an openness about her imagery. So doors, yeah, there's the apostrophe in like words as a sort of a hinge that speaks to possession. There's there's 4 sections in the book, and one of them, 2 of them are called Australian Open and sort of like the back and forth of tennis. There's always like, I guess what we return to is like identity becomes sort of like the responsibility of choice that can be quite burdensome and fraught. And the images in this collection they just turn over in my mind, I think, because they are so open and she is so generous with them, that it's just stayed with me for, like, it's just one of those collections that I've continued to think about for months and months and months. And especially within reading so many books, I feel like that's like quite powerful to me.
Yeah.
It is. It really means something when you're reading 200 odd books and one keeps chiming away in the back of your head or the front of your head. It's those are the ones that you know you can't let go and that are going to be there at the end. Hey?
Exactly.
Yeah. Cate, were you going to talk about poetry? I can't remember.
No, I don't have a poetry, but we can move on, if you like, to
Yeah, I think we should.
the graphic novel and the short fiction that's on the list, and talk about that stuff.
Okay, cool.
Because that thing about form, I think it's really interesting when you are reading something and you know that it's in its most perfect form, as the author has intended it to be.
You're talking about Stone Fruit now?
Well, all of them. They're the ones that really do stay with you as memorable. Are the ones where that couldn't be anything else than what it is, you know. So it's a challenge to open something and to think, why are they doing it like this? Why? What are they asking of me? Kind of stuff. There is that destabilising, but of course, your faith is immediately restored when you know you're in good hands of somebody who is doing something for that beautiful reason, to create something which is its own perfect shape.
Yeah.
And so we might talk about the graphic novel, because that was one that was out of the box as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we were all really
Stone
taken
Fruit by Levi.
by the tenderness of this story. It's about a queer couple who are sort of at a crossroads in their relationship and have a sort of stretched, I guess, by like familial obligations. And I think the queerness of the book actually made me reflect a lot. Like a few years ago, I went to the Coming Back Out Ball, which is this this event, I think by all the Queensmen is who put it on. And when I went, I was talking to this older queer guy who introduced me at that time to this idea of when we talk about queer family and chosen family, often what we forget is that families are usually intergenerational, and sort of a history is quite important. And I thought, when I was reading this graphic novel, I was really reminded of the fact that when we talk about chosen family, I think we often forget about how important, although like finding a new family is beautiful and wonderful, that sort of losing in some ways families is very painful and stays with you. And so this book about this couple sort of going back to heal wounds in their families of origin, but also sort of having this like really imaginative, beautiful world between them and one of the characters' nieces who they babysit for. It was just sort of this wonderful, tender domesticity that was rendered perfectly through every element, through the art, through the dialogue, through the writing. It just really showed how sophisticated, I think, graphic novels can be. And I don't say that in a patronizing, like, oh, a graphic novel made it, well done. It's just, because that's what beautiful literature does, I think, is that complex emotional weaving, which Stone Fruit did.
I also really liked that this was one of only a few books in the Stella this year that addressed the role of fundamental Christianity in Australian life. Because, as we've just seen in the last sitting week of Parliament, you know, the role, the importance, the influence of, religion in general, organised religion in general, and fundamental Christianity in particular, is something that we ignore at our peril. And I thought just the very natural way that made its way into this narrative was important as a true reflection of Australian life. Sisonke, did you have anything to say about Stone Fruit?
Yeah, just that, picking up on that last point you made, I think saying that it picked up on it in a really natural way feels exactly right. And it did it in a very thoughtful and not polarizing way. And I think, unfortunately, fundamentalisms of all kinds tend to be polarizing. But one of the things about family is how complicated it is and how much love there is in spite of that stuff. And I just thought the way this book dealt with that was incredibly smart and loving. And if we think about it as a mirror to this society, I think it's a really, really tiny mirror, because it doesn't seem like there's very many politicians. Maybe we need to prescribe this book to them, because it certainly doesn't seem like anyone is paying attention to the complex way in which we actually live our lives. And instead, it's all about slogans and sound bites and all of that stuff. But this book did that incredibly well.
Declan, what do you think about permafrost?
Oh, I think there's a small connection, actually, because both Lee Lai's book and S.J. Norman's are very brooding.
Is S.J. Norman with us tonight, I think? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, I have so much more stress now. Normally when I write reviews, I never have to see the person. We avoid each other forever afterwards. Sorry? No, I have only good things to say. You know, what I found with Lee Lai and with S.J. Norman is they're very brooding books, and I mean, I adore that. I really...
Really? You found Lee Lai brooding?
Yeah,
I did too.
Did
you?
Yeah. Did you? Oliver, you've got
We're
the
giving away the
deciding vote
shortlist
here.
discussion.
I found it troubled, but I wouldn't have said brooding. But anyway, go on. I interrupted you.
Both trouble books, maybe.
We can't fight on stage. We've already done the fighting.
He's allowed to be wrong.
Yeah, but they're both books, I think, that are troubled and possibly brooding. And maybe, I think Maria Tamarkin has a real gift for blurbs. Hers says, "You are caught, haunted, rearranged," which really sums up, I mean, honestly, when I read reviews or reactions to this book, everyone was just talking about how it lingered. And that was my reaction too. And it does it in a way where there's no big special effects. Bruce Willis doesn't jump from a skyscraper. There's no cop cars getting trashed. It's very subtle, and yet it haunts you without any explicit or lurid effect. And how S.J. Norman does that is something I'll need to keep studying. I also enjoyed the way that it reminded me, I grew up with a lot of Gothic literature. One of the first authors I fell in love with was Edgar Allan Poe. And I grew up, you know, along with the country in Kalgoorlie and Laverton. And Australia actually has a bit of a tradition there too that I learned from authors like Gary Crew and others of Gothic, almost folkloric literature. And of course, you know, among First Nations, there's many, many ghost stories. And to me, a ghost story stands for a reminder of many things, but especially change and mortality. And I think a lot of these stories are haunted by the idea of change. The opening one is a really beautiful but slightly disturbing, and again, without any explicit effect, disturbing reflection on a person moving from prepubescence into pubescence, a young girl and a relationship with her stepmother. But overall, yeah, I just really like the fact that with these stories, you're being reminded of many older traditions of storytelling and of writing that do depend upon the uncanny and maybe the macabre and the grotesque.
Speaking of haunting,
Oh, perfect segue. I want to talk about a very strong short story collection that was on our long list by Paige Clark. Would Paige Clark be here tonight?
Yeah.
Hey! This
one
she
of
is
so
haunted.
many debuts. on
Oh
the
my
long
goodness.
list.
And yet, the thing about this debut, it is such an assured and highly inventive debut collection of stories. You just have to kind of dig in and just see, where is this voice sprung from? That was the first thing I thought, who's this? How have they done this? It's incredible. Now, Paige Clark currently at work on her PhD at University of Melbourne, where I wasn't surprised to hear that her research addresses the relationships between race and craft and the teaching of creative writing. And she's a writer and researcher and teacher who already has a BA in Mass Communication Theory from Boston University and an MA in Creative Writing from University of Melbourne. So I suppose it's no surprise that her prose just leaps off the page with this kind of confident assurance by a really masterfully rendered range of voices. Those voices are almost all women caught in moments of unease or uncertainty, and the kind of reluctant, often unwelcome transformation that personally I find extremely plausible and convincing. Well, no one voluntarily changes, let's face it. Which characterises these sort of memorable protagonists in this with a very quirky and inventive
And funny.
dimension.
I laughed out
which
loud.
is, that's the thing. Whether this author is talking about these quite large and serious issues of race, intergenerational trauma, cultural diaspora, I suppose, the mother-daughter relationships and how fraught they are. Nothing is explained. Everything is embodied. It's punchy. It's eclectic. They're sometimes surreal. They're sometimes tragicomic. And they're always sort of as memorable as like a sort of a close-up magic trick. You know that feeling where you know on one level that it's an illusion, but you just want to do it again, because it's so unexpected and so entertaining. I'm just going to read you a little bit so you can get a sense of, I wish there was a better word than this too, but how very voicey these are. This is from the first story called Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, a woman who's making these lightning-fast bargains with God when she falls pregnant. Our house radiates with warmth, but God does not knock to come in. Before he says his prayers, my lover pats my stomach with wide, flat strokes. When the baby's born, he says, we'll be happy. I thought we were happy, I say. I am, he said, but I can't wait. For what, I say? For God's little miracle. Don't joke, I say. I thought you didn't believe in God, he says. I remember the deal, made in hushed tones so as not to disturb the man in the paddock. I remember God circling our house, riding that majestic horse, its black and white spots flashing in the wheaten sky. Oh God, I made a mistake. Can we make another deal? I told you, God says. I knew you couldn't keep your end of the bargain. I knew you didn't like deals. God is smug. He didn't come to check on me. He came to check on his baby. He asked me for a cup of tea, white with 2 sugars. My lover wants the baby, I say. I'll lose him without it. Then you'll have it all, God. Is that what you want? What about the dog? Do you think the dog compares to the baby? What would you do with my baby anyway, God? They're a lot of work. I'll take good care of a baby, God says. God, that's not what I meant. What about my mother? She's old, but she's fit, I say. She's mostly good company. She has a red-hot wit and a knack for making dessert. So really charming and innovative and assured stories that we all really enjoyed, and it was just so great as a real fan of the short story to just see how very alive and well this form is in hands like Paige Clark's hands. So love this one.
I think something that also tied a lot of these 12 books together is that they're all quite challenging as books, but they're also, so many of them are very funny. There's a lot a lot of wit and sort of like sly humour across all of them, I think, and Paige Clark particularly.
Some of the ones that we haven't got to yet are more serious, I guess. I'm thinking of No Document, Coming of Age in the War on Terror, and Another Day in the Colony. Sisonke, I think you were going to talk to Coming of Age in the War on Terror, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you are mistaken, but or am I mistaken? Or am I mistaken?
Can I put you on the spot and ask you for... I only found out at lunchtime that my daughter hadn't drowned in the flood, so
No,
I'm not exactly on top of things.
It could be me. I've got COVID, so I'm also not exactly on top of things. I think that a lot of the non. Sorry. I'm echoing.
No, you go.
Okay. I don't know if it's in my head or if it's the actual audio. So I think that a lot of the nonfiction this year was, of course, incredibly strong. And as you say, Melissa, dealing with big issues. And Randa's book kind of confirms her status as an incredibly important public intellectual. It is backed up with this incredibly detailed, beautiful research, and the way that she weaves together these narratives of young people who have grown up really in the shadows of 9/11 and what it's meant for Australia, essentially, to have been at war for the last 2 decades, and for Australian people, in many ways, mainstream society, to have been waging a war against Muslims in this country. Her articulation of what that has felt like, and their articulation in particular, is just really, really powerful. So unfortunately, I have the electronic edition, and so I can't pull it up and share quotes from you. But those quotes from young people are incredibly powerful. I see you reaching for it now, Melissa, and so maybe you can help me out there. But yeah, a very important book that I think is part of a discourse and a narrative that everyone in this country needs to get their heads around. So yeah, Coming of Age, beautiful, incredible, powerful book.
I'll just give one example of one of the young people that, oh no, he's a sheikh, he's not one of the young people. I'd just like to say that it's so unusual that, young people of any ethnic or religious background get taken seriously and have their voices heard by public intellectuals in Australia. So here's some of the words. This is Ray, a Jewish Australian. He says, "This is Australia, home of the rich and the poor. Tourists come and go to see the various shows. Collection of people from all over the globe. They give me hope. This is Australia. Police in my area, they don't like what I do. I don't have a choice because I've lost my job. Australia, where is my chance?" And Aisha, 17, Afghan Australian Muslim. "This is Australia. People think all Muslims are the same, that we're all terrorists or girls in scarves without a brain. They hear it all in the news. I was born on 11th of September 2002, first anniversary of 9/11. No one in my family forgets my birthday." So yeah, coming of age in the war on terror, really important and valuable and readable contribution to public life. Which brings us to No Document.
Another Day in the Colony as well. So
yeah.
we'll do No Document though, and then we can talk about Another Day in the Colony.
No Document, book length essay. Throwing books on the floor. That deals with Crawford remembering and responding to the loss of a friend that she met in art school and became a long-term artistic collaborator and comrade. Sorry, I got distracted. extremely beautiful, using grief in a really wonderful way. I feel like often books about grief are thinking about it in sort of the immediate aftermath, or even looking back at it, but still looking back at sort of the immediate. And this sort of looks at grief in a really, from a vantage point where it's been completely metabolized and it's settled, but it still has an impact. And she uses it to think about border policing and capitalism and really global issues, and to think about construction and or creation and deconstruction side by side, in a really powerful way. I felt extremely moved by this book. It's a book about grief, which is also, I think, a book about love, and the ways that grief, I feel like when you are grieving, you're thinking about the loss of possibility, but it really dives into this in sort of a very hopeful way, where, you know, grief is awful to go through as an experience, and I think, you know, the last couple of years we've all experienced some form of grief, many forms of grief, and when you're losing possibility, it's almost like this swan song where you think, well, it's lost now, but almost by feeling that loss, I've glimpsed everything, like total knowledge. I've glimpsed all the answers. This is how we would have changed things. This is what would have led to revolution, and now it's gone. And it's devastating, but also it's, you know, it's knowledge. It's a really beautiful knowledge.
I can just see Declan sitting on the edge of his chair here, as if you've got something you're dying to say.
Oh no, I just think, damn, this is good.
Exactly right. Yeah.
I think we all were really, really affected by this book.
Sisonke, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, I guess for both No Document and Coming of Age, just to add that, you know, let's recognize how important these books are, particularly in this moment, because of course we are watching, you know, Russia invade Ukraine, and we are finding ourselves, you know, once again in a moment that I thought, I guess, you know, stupidly, that I wouldn't see again, which is, you know, this revitalized nuclear threat and this sense that we are often so beholden to fragile men's egos, and have been, of course, sort of ceaselessly for the last 3 decades. And so again, whether you're particularly invested in one war or another, I think the notion of what war does and how it makes us construct people as enemies is incredibly important. And in many ways, that's what both of these books are dealing with, the violence and brutality of war and its afterlives. And I think that's powerful.
Yeah, is Anwen Crawford in the room? No. It's really is a remarkable book, because as Sisonke says, it is investigating and analysing war, but it's doing that through a prism of a friendship and a comradeship that is no more because one of the people has died. But it's going right back to, I think, 17th century French history. It just goes to, it talks about, you know, the war on animals, you know, what Australia's done and has done and is doing with asylum seekers and refugees. It really, and infused the whole way with the personal, and so it's, and even structurally, it's really innovative. It's really a very remarkable piece of work.
I think it's similar to The Open in that way as well, where it's synthesizing so much at once.
Synthesizing is the right word.
But in a really personal way.
Interesting fragmentary way too, that allows you to do that work, to be making those connections for yourself.
Which I think
exactly
is really generous and respectful of a writer to give to a reader too.
Yeah.
I've heard booksellers had trouble categorizing No Document, and there were sightings of it in the psychology section, you know, just trying to work out what sort of document they were dealing with. It was,
Where to shelve it? That's the question.
It is a genuinely unusual book.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to leave anyone out. We're getting
It's Chelsea, it's Sisonke to talk about
the
Another
two
Day in the
novels
Colony.
as well. Yeah,
But also Another Day in the Colony. Before we
yeah.
go to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, did we?
No, it's Sisonke's.
Oh, Sisonke, did you want to talk about Chelsea's book?
I would love to talk about Chelsea's book. What a collection, unflinching as Chelsea Watego always is in its refusal as a collection of essays to back away from the core problem of Australia, which is, of course, its systematic and ongoing brutalization of Indigenous people, of Indigenous people's ideas and communities, because Australia refuses to accept the founding premise of European presence here, which is the problem that the native presents. I think this is what Chelsea continually reminds us of in every single essay, that the native in this country presents a problem, because the native is a reminder of occupation, the native is a reminder of memory, the native is the conscience, all of these ways in which to refuse to be a colonized subject in a place in which you have never ceded sovereignty is to be a problem. And if there is one thing that Chelsea is committed to, it's being a problem in all the most wonderful, joyful, shit-stirring kind of ways. And so I found it an incredibly important read. It is not a read that is intended for everyone. I love the claiming of the we in a way that does this. We had a lot of fun, I think, talking about this book as judges. But it is, again, a powerful affirmation of Chelsea's role as a preeminent public intellectual in this place. Whether she wants this place to claim her or not, I think that I proudly claim her as a voice for all of us.
Yeah, well said. And I think that brings us to the two novels finally.
That's right.
If I'm not wrong. Yeah, okay, so the two, out of the short list of a dozen books, there were only two novels on the list. Bodies of Light by Jennifer Down and Bila Yaradungalungdire by Anita Heiss, so I think are both with us tonight. And Cate, or Declan, did you want to talk to Bodies of Light?
Yeah, Bodies of Light by Jennifer Down. Where to begin? It's an ambitious book. The ambition is what I really admire. Before this, Jennifer Down had written a short story collection and a novel. And to take on a book, it's nearly, just over 400 pages, and it sticks with the protagonist, Maggie, and her story is she's institutionalized, she's abused from a very young age, repeatedly by different people. So essentially, she's institutionalized, and that's how she grows up, and her story is one of moving through a world where the edges are rough, and you don't have many friends, there isn't a safe haven necessarily, and making her way through that. Not only is she very well drawn, but many of the characters who accompany her through this journey, which ranges across suburban Melbourne into Parkville, and then across to the US and internationally. And it takes in, 3 decades of time. So it is very much a Bildungsroman that follows the character very much from essentially birth into their 50s, I think it is. And I just, I admired the similitude of the voice. It's very much written as a dialogue, kind of with the reader, a conversation, and one in which, as I say, you've got characters. I think we all agree we loved the character, one of the carers who takes Maggie in. Don't know if anyone can remember her name, but she's a very she's a tough woman and a wise woman, and she's really the kind of one of the mother figures, I guess, in the novel.
Sisonke remembers her name.
No,
Sisonke, oh my God.
I do. Every time I talk, you people don't listen to me. Her name is Judith.
That's right.
Judith.
Thanks, Sisonke.
Thank you so much.
I
Thank
had
you,
made
Sisonke.
I had made a lot of other important contributions that have been ignored, and I will note this
I'm gonna
tomorrow
shut up.
in our next meeting.
Yeah, and Sisonke, thank you so much. And we're going to read Judith now, and she's talking to Maggie. In this scene, it's talking about Maggie's education. Maggie says, "What are they going to do?" I yelled. "They don't even expect me to go to school. As long as you're under my roof, you're expected to go to school. What if I want to drop out? You think I should care about all that shit just because you do? I think you're wasting your time with that bloody mullet," she said. I think that's referring to Ned, which is a very kind of, a very interesting relationship she has early on. "You're just bitter because you're an old bitch with no husband and no kids. Oh, that's me all right," she said, turning back to the dishes, cigarette dry voice, "a bitter old bitch." So I just love the way she owns that, and I love, these, very much Maggie is a character I think a lot of readers become invested in, and it's not hard to see why. This reminded me of those classic sort of coming-of-age stories of human bondage by Somerset Maugham, or a great example of adventurous, committed social realist fiction.
And fabulous
What I
prose.
really liked about this book, it's really spoke to me, and I'm going to pass it on to a couple of underclass white women that I know pretty well. But just the portrayal of a life without stability, and the how normal that is for Maggie, how moving from house to house, from relationship to relationship, to be from abuser to abuser, to have no parents active in her life, and yet to be strong and to have different things going on, to be making a life in that context. And you don't see that a lot in I don't see it a lot in Australian fiction, just how real that is for a lot of people, that you don't stay in a house for more than a few weeks or a few months at most, and yet that is normal, and you can make a life despite that.
Yeah. So that I found that too, that it was harrowing, and yet...
See, I didn't find it harrowing, I found it relatable.
Yeah.
And I don't often read a book where that stuff is just background, and that's normal.
Yes.
And that's your starting point.
Yeah.
Because that used to be my life, and it's like, yeah, okay, she gets it, great.
And that destabilising effect of that, and the kind of the ongoing sort of damage that does, and you can see that playing out in her life that continues, and yet I find that her sort of resilience and her toughness actually quite exhilarating. And I thought the prose was just fantastic. It was such a beautifully written book.
It is very nice writing.
Man, it was really... I remember reading it at night, and you know that when you read a book at night and then you put it down and you turn the light off and you just lie there staring at the ceiling in the dark for a while. It was that kind of book.
I stayed up late reading this book.
Yeah, it was... it's incredibly visceral and beautifully written and so memorable. It's wonderful.
So, lastly, wonderful...
Is Anita Heiss in the room? She's beautiful. I'm going to try rolling the R as well. Billet Garodangalangdore. Now, if you don't know, Anita's a well-known speaker and advocate for Indigenous literacy in Australian First Nations literature. She's a Professor of Communications at the University of Queensland and a proud member of the Wiradjuri Nation. And in 2018, if you didn't hear this on Conversations or know this story, she started learning Wiradjuri language from many teachers, I think including Uncle Stan Grant, rediscovering...
That's not the journalist, that's his father.
That's right.
Stan Grant Senior.
Stan Grant Senior, thank you. Rediscovering a sort of a celebration and connection with Wiradjuri culture in the process, standing on the floodplains, ironically enough, of Wagga Wagga, and imagining the lives of Wiradjuri ancestors, particularly grounding this in a true story, in the heroism of those who saved many white settler lives.
I think 60 lives were saved.
In the 1852 Great Flood in Gundagai. And that's kind of what the author has centred this story on by creating a narrator and reclaiming this sort of story in this sort of cultural narrative that forms like the river itself, I suppose, in a really skilled way, the sort of winding backbone of this epic story. It's a love story interwoven with colonialism. It's a tale of heroism and hardship interwoven with systemic racism, oppression, and all kinds of perspectives really on sovereignty and resilience and who gets to be remembered, who gets to tell the story. It's a love story, and it's also a very interesting story about spirituality and different belief systems and the way that they intersect and implode against each other. Its main character, Wagadani, like the mighty Murrumbidgee River, seeks a course through country. And she's tenacious and she's determined. She's a fantastic heroine, full of heart and humanity. And through her, the reader too is given the chance to have that prismatic experience, I think, to walk along this river of her ancestors in the way she's determined to resist being owned and being sort of personally colonised as well as culturally colonised, and to find her own way home, which she does in her own way. And the story is extremely moving and beautiful. And there's a great, I think, just to read the review from The Guardian, I agree with this wholeheartedly. There are books you encounter as an adult that you wish you could press into the hands of your younger self. A book that turns Australia's long mythologised settler history into a raw and resilient heart song. So a book that I think should be on every secondary school syllabus in Australia, this one. I absolutely loved it. And that's the last book on our long list of 12. So as you can see, all of us found very many different things to admire and to champion. And it's been a really interesting process. I think, I don't want to speak for all of us, but it's certainly been a great honour to be able to have selected a range like this in our 12 books.
Absolutely. Thanks, Cate. Our time is up, so readings are selling the long-listed books at the back there, I gather. And Jacqueline, was I to invite people down to the moat for a drink as well? So yeah, grab a book or 3 or 4 or 5 and come and have a glass of wine or a glass of soft drink. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sisonke.
Hi, everyone. Enjoy the drinks.
I hope you feel better. I'll buy you a drink, Sisonke. Okay.
You can't drink it with me.
Oh, no,
Pretty
perfect.
good. Yeah, no.